All right, we are on recording. And just as a note, of course, that while one or more commissioners and their staff may be present, no decisions will be made at this meeting. Let's go to the next slide, please. Great, so for WebEx logistics, all attendees are going to be muted on entry by default, and we will have a number of Q&A sessions sort of peppered throughout this presentation, and we'll be very clear about when we are going to be having that. So for asking questions, you have two options here. One, you can raise your hand. You do so by going down to the attendees link and clicking on the raise hand button. We will go ahead and request to unmute you during the Q&A portions, and you will unmute yourself. You'll have 2 minutes to ask your question. And we do ask that when you are done, you go ahead and lower your hand after your question. If you have another question, go ahead and re-raise your hand because it helps us prioritize how to answer those questions. We will also be doing a written Q&A during the session, although the Q&A, we will be reading those questions out loud and answering them verbally. WebEx did have an update, so it's a little bit different now. On what you should see, as you see here, is you can access the written Q&A if you have a little green S button there on the bottom right. If you don't see that, go ahead and go all the way to the bottom right and click on the 3 buttons and click into Slido for polling and Q&A, and we will be using that functionality throughout the meeting. With that, and of course, we will remind you of how to do this during the Q&A session, so there's as little confusion as possible. Let's go to the next slide, please. Great, so just a quick overview of the agenda for this meeting. We've just gone through the introduction here. We'll be going ahead and doing a review of CPUC work to date on the resiliency topic area, including just a quick review of the 4-pillar methodology, the need for a comprehensive analytical tool, and sort of the vision for this study. And then we'll pass it over to Lumen and SIG, who will be talking about their index and demos that they've so far done to date under our contract. We'll also have an additional Q&A session and then talk about next steps thereafter. So with that, to the next slide, please. Great, and with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Roseanne. Roseanne, go ahead.
Hi. Next slide, please. So my name is Roseanne Witkevich. I'm a senior analyst on the Grid Resiliency and Microgrids team. The problem to solve that Lumen and SIG is working on is how can we optimize our grid investments to integrate resiliency. As more extreme events happen, the potential for more large-scale electric disruptions grows. Resilience to these disruptions looks different to different people, and the value of that resilience is different for those at opposite ends of the equity and wealth spectrum. So disruptions highlight the interdependencies also of critical infrastructure systems, especially as the state of California reaches for its decarbonization goals, which is so critical to minimizing climate change in the first place. The task is to increase confidence in electrification with optimal grid investments that meet our safety, reliability, and renewable portfolio goals while increasing resilience and maintaining affordability. Next slide, please. So to address this task, we first look at the resiliency trapezoid that shows how a system function responds over time to a disruption, the solid line or the floor of the trapezoid when it drops down towards the x-axis shown in this graph, and how resiliency in the system affects the system function response, which is shown as the dashed line. So as we add resiliency with that, we hope the floor of that trapezoid lifts. The mechanisms of improving resilience can be accomplished by one of the following. We reduce the magnitude of disruption, shown as number 1 here, or in other words, how far down it crashes. We extend the duration of resistance, in other words, how fast it crashes. That's that speed or the angle of number 1, shown as number 2 in the model. Reduce the duration of the disruption, shown as number 3, which is the length of the floor, or increase the restoration rate, which is that curve at the end in the recovery rate. The goal becomes how to find ways to measure the difference between the baseline case and the improvements. The chart on the left are examples of the kind of system functions we could potentially trace to understand if we're making an impact on improving resilience. Coincidentally, we could chart these system functions as relative to each other by way of the common x-axis of time to gain understanding of the system function interrelatedness and whether our improvement of resilience in one system is impacting another. Next slide, please. The resiliency trapezoid is an oversimplified graphic depiction of a complex measurement of response to a system function disruption. But we've used the resiliency trapezoid concept to guide how to think about resiliency assessment in our current system and how to assess whether investment decisions have improved resiliency. We recognize that resiliency means different things to different communities and organizations at different scales. Geography and the hazards that cause disruptions vary greatly. Communities have different levels of resources at hand to address local resilience priorities, making local coordination really important to the process. Changing technologies available cause changes in the system resiliency. Measuring the changes in resiliency becomes relative to geography, community priorities, the likelihood and frequency of types of disruptions, as well as to other goals like clean energy, affordability, and daily operations. So to take these complexities into consideration, we've suggested a holistic resiliency evaluation and planning approach that provides a scalable, sequential, and iterative process by which resiliency can be assessed. Mitigation measures can be compared and optimized. Resiliency responses can be assessed for effectiveness, and resiliency efforts can be incrementally improved. As a scalable methodology, it could be applied to a specific small application like a single customer solution, a multi-property solution, or as large as a regional bulk grid planning assessment of mitigation strategies. Each one of these pillars is worthy of a deeper discussion, and in working group meetings, we explored each pillar in depth, working with stakeholders to validate this approach to resiliency planning. So the details within each of these pillars provide a method to address the myriad aspects of resilience. In baseline assessment, numbers 1, 2, and 3 listed in the slide here discuss what do we want to protect and where is it. Number 4 and 5 discusses what threatens it. Number 6 looks at how well are we doing now to protect it. That's all in baseline assessment, taking in a look at where we are currently. In pillar 2, we look at mitigation measure assessment. What protection options do we have? That's number 1. What does the best job at protecting the most? And what is a cost? The resiliency scorecard in pillar 3 is a way to score the resiliency configuration characteristics that reflect benchmarks of resiliency achievement and includes characteristics that support clean energy goals, local community resilience goals, identified as the way to understand what is one's critical load or priority load or discretionary load. So if you had to curtail your load, what would you do first? We're not tying the scorecard to any compensatory or valuation outcomes. This tool right now is intended to be a preferential metric that reflects weighting towards state policy goals and resiliency goals with a relationship to identified resilience targets that are user defined, ideally from that local community. We're thinking of it as a comparative tool of resilience configurations, and it's still in development. Pillar 4 looks at the iterative nature of this methodology. This is where we use our metrics to answer how well did the investments do in reaching resiliency targets? Did the investments reduce impacts on the community? So we've set the metrics up in our baseline assessment, and in pillar 4, we go back and we look at how well those metrics did in an effort to understand what might our next iteration as we go forth, the next iteration of investments, be able to provide. Next slide, please. Energy Division staff has been conducting workshops aimed at diving deeper into some of the more complex aspects of the four-pillar methodological approach and how to move it from concept to application. So within these meetings, we included external partner presentations that provided insight and discussion opportunities about tools such as the interruption cost estimate calculator, POET, the power outage economic tool, and RenCat, the resilience node cluster analysis tool that could be used as potential metrics in implementation of both baseline and mitigation measure assessments within this methodology. We discussed the feasibility of how to gain greater coordination between local authorities and the utilities by using local hazard mitigation plans and locally determined resilience targets, an important concept across all four pillars. We looked at applied use case demonstrations of how to apply the four-pillar methodology to resilience planning at the small utility microgrid scale and the medium campus-wide scale. Within this workshop series, Lumen Energy Strategy held 3 workshops discussing how standard definitions of resiliency and specific resiliency metrics can be applied at the grid planning process scale, focusing on integrated resource planning, or IRP, as the use case. How resilience priorities could be discussed and coordinated between local jurisdictions and load serving entities, or LSEs. They also looked at how these resources could provide both local resiliency and IRP level grid resources, and how these resources could help optimize the balance between and trade-offs between blue sky and black sky conditions, potentially reducing costs for ratepayers. Today's presentation introduces how Lumen Energy Strategy is taking these concepts into the modeling of a consensus-based, open source, and interactive equitable resilience modeling toolkit that can advance the CPUC and stakeholders' understanding of equitable resource needs and solutions that has the potential to be applied to grid planning and policy activities. I'll now turn it over to Mariko Geronimo from Lumen Energy Strategy.
Thank you, Roseanne. Owner and I are really excited to be here and to introduce our collaboration with you and with Spatial Informatics Group. Before I start, I just want to acknowledge, I see a question already, a good question. We will pause for Q&A after Owner presents a few slides. But if you see the Q&A and you want to upvote any questions, if someone asks a question you have too, you can click on the thumbs up and upvote questions, but we will get to that question in a few slides. Thank you for that. Spatial Informatics Group is an environmental think tank. They are an industry leader in geospatial analysis and tools. Notably here in California, SIG has been impactful in the wildfire risk management space. SIG was a key collaborator that developed the original wildfire threat maps that you all know well in around 2014, 2015. They're also developing some very cutting-edge geospatial decision support tools, which you'll hear about later today. And you'll hear about that from Shane Romsos. Shane is SIG's project manager on this study. He's a wildlife biologist specializing in a wide range of applications, including natural resource planning and design and implementation of monitoring and evaluation programs. We also have Dr. Austin Troy on the line. Dr. Austin Troy is a principal and the co-founder of SIG. He's the author of The Very Hungry City, and his focus is on ecosystem services mapping, valuation and assessment, and urban sustainability, and he will direct development of the Resilience Index, geospatial analytics, and data curation. And we have Dr. Robert Taylor. Dr. Robert Taylor is a physical environmental scientist and geospatial analyst with a focus on urban planning for environmental sustainability and climate action adaptation. And Dr. Taylor is our lead geospatial analyst on this study. So we're very excited to be collaborating with the SIG team. And this work we'll describe as being developed in affiliation with Lumen's Warp to Resilience initiative, which is an EPIC-funded study. And we'll talk more about how we're integrating that work in a few minutes. But to go back again to what Julian said, we have 2 channels for providing feedback. One is through discussion and Q&A, shown here on the left. The WebEx Q&A is now through a partial integration with the Slido platform, as Julian mentioned. And to get to that, you click on the green S at the bottom of your meeting window, or you might have to look for the ellipses to get to that S. Depending on your WebEx version, you might not see Slido. And for that reason, we'll do all of the Q&A verbally. So we'll read your question and answer that verbally. If you don't see Slido at all, please raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute so you can ask verbally during the Q&A sessions. The other way to provide feedback is through polls. And I know as the audience, you see 2 options for Slido, one's Q&A and one's polls. Don't go to the Slido polls. We're going to do the polls through your browser. So I recommend doing that on your computer or on your phone. You can also open your browser on your phone by scanning this QR code here. You can also go to pollev.com/lumen999, and that'll take you to our polling page, and you just stay on that page for the duration of the meeting. If you don't have a browser, you can join via text. It's possible. If you text Lumen 999 to 22333 and follow the prompts, you can do that. But I highly recommend joining through your browser on your phone if you can. The results will show when you answer, and if not, we'll also show results here in the presentation. And here we go. Let's start with the first poll. This will help us get a feel for who's in the virtual room. So go to pollev.com/lumen999, or you can scan this QR code. And the question is, what stakeholder perspective best describes you? Pick one that best describes you, and you can see the results there or here. You can edit your response, so you can do that by doing the undo button on the right of your response. When you're done, stay on this browser page, and I'll bring you to the next poll. All poll responses are anonymous. I just see responses. I don't know who responds with what. So let's see here. See if we can get poll updates. All right. Is everyone able to see the poll?
I think it just jumped to the next question. So
Oh, okay.
I see the question on the data sources.
Okay. Let me get to this one. All right. We don't want to ask you about data yet. Sorry about that. So if you can go to pollev.com/lumen999 and then pick the stakeholder perspective that best describes you. Here we go. We've got some responses coming in. Sorry about that. We are. All right, here we go. Oh, wow, we have a pretty good mix of people. So it looks like we have a lot of people from the regulator, policymaker, utility load serving entity perspective. That's consistent with our prior workshops. We also have some community representatives, customer representatives, technical specialists and academics. So thank you and welcome to the meeting today. So I'm going to go to the second poll and hopefully that will activate. Let's see here. So we'd like to, so stay on that same browser page. We'd like to see which related events and materials you have attended or reviewed. Please select all that apply and then submit your response. And this will help us better tailor the presentation and Q&A for you today, but it also help us better tailor the next info session. So the first one is Lumen just completed an energy storage study for the CPUC that focuses a lot on exploring what we call cross-domain multi-use applications for distributed energy resources and being able to provide these resources, being able to provide both resilience services to customers and communities and system services to ratepayers is a big theme in that report. The second one, Lumen did 3 presentations in 2023 on the value of resiliency for all of you and for the CPUC Resiliency and Microgrids team. This study follows off of that discussion. So in those presentations, we talked about the definition of resilience, resilience metrics, and methodologies for resilience planning, focusing really on an integrated resource planning use case. So if you attended any of those, oh, thank you for joining those. The CPUC also hosted many other presentations and demonstrations of the 4-pillar methodology presented by LBNL, Sandia, SCE, SDG&E, Sonoma County Junior College District, and the Santa Rosa Junior College. These were all really well done presentations. They're all very informative, posted on the CPUC's website. So if you attended those, please check that. Great. Looks like a lot of people in the audience attended those. Those are all recorded, by the way, if you want to look back at those. CPUC hosted several resiliency and microgrids working group meetings. So select that if you were part of those meetings or part of the resiliency and microgrids working group. And then going back to 2020, the CPUC staff, they laid a lot of groundwork with their concept paper. If you've read that, check that. And this is also helpful if you've gone through none or few of these materials, check that, or most or all. That's helpful. Okay, so we actually have quite a few people in the audience where the material we'll be presenting is pretty new. So we'll keep that in mind as we go along. And we've also got a bunch of lists of resources for you and URLs where you can go back. If you'd like to continue being engaged in this study, we'll give you some materials to look through before we meet next time. So thank you for responding. We'll take a snapshot of all these results for all the polls today, and we'll include them in a post-meeting version of the slides so you can look back on that. But keep your PollEV browser tab open. We'll have more polls later on. And with that, I'll turn it over to Owner Iden, Lumen's co-founder and chief of market risk and strategy. And Owner will talk about our analytical approach and work plan.
Thanks, Mariko. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. So I'd like to start off by sharing our overarching study objective, which is to develop and demonstrate a geospatial equitable resilience index model, and do that by leveraging existing data-driven tools and metrics, with the ultimate goal of supporting resilient, equitable, and cost-effective and affordable grid infrastructure investment planning. So this scope has significant synergies with our EPIC-funded Work to Resilience initiative, where we are tasked to advance California's analytical tools for grid planning by incorporating impacts of climate change and environmental extremes on both electric supply and also electric demand, and to evaluate the future resilience of electric service to ratepayers. So given these synergies, we decided to integrate this new study with our ongoing Work to Resilience model development. And we believe that this provides a unique opportunity for the CPUC and stakeholders to build a bridge towards GIS-based analysis and also towards incorporating foundational climate science underlying many of the future resilience concerns of California's communities. So with that, I'd like to talk a little more about Work to Resilience before jumping into the new study. Next slide, please. All right. So this is the flow chart of our Work to Resilience model, which we presented in previous workshops, most recently in November of last year. So for those who couldn't attend back then, we'll provide links to all the related materials, the slides and the recordings at the end of our presentation today. So you can see here several moving parts and linkages. The key data sources are shown in dark purple, flowing into various intermediate analysis. So the model, I'm not going to get into every one of them, but just want to highlight a few things. At a high level, the model is designed to support analysis in all 4 pillars that Roseanne described earlier today. From initial baseline assessment all the way to testing resource portfolios for resilience improvements. The model architecture is shaped by the feedback from our prior stakeholder workshops, specifically by the discussions on key elements of resilience definition. So relatedly, you can see that the model's core is centered on estimating customer level outages. So everything on the left side of the flowchart helps us capture key failure points and hazards leading to potential customer outages. So historical and future weather hazards are incorporated to construct grid stressors on both electric supply and demand. And as a key feature of the model, we represent both bulk grid and distribution system, which is important because it allows us to evaluate the grid stressors and failures at both levels, both the bulk system level and also at the more local level. And then everything on the right helps us identify key impacts and resilience planning priorities. So recognizing that, and this is something that we've discussed extensively in the workshops last year, recognizing that not all outages have the same impact, there is a need for prioritization. So the loop that you see on the right side highlights the iterative process that we've outlined to explore and prioritize resilience situations and identify resource attributes that are needed to help in those situations. So with that, our initial plan included use of data sources like social burden index and CAWA results, the utility climate adaptation vulnerability assessment results, to represent community characteristics and vulnerabilities, with the expectation that these data sources would play a limited role in identifying and prioritizing outage events. So next slide, please. So this next slide shows the same flowchart, but it now integrates our new study on Equitable Resilience Index. So this new study creates an opportunity for a far more data-driven representation of community and customer resilience by incorporating various geospatial data layers on population, environment, and the infrastructure. And later today, we're going to talk a little bit about data sources for these. But here, the Equitable Resilience Index will provide the users a direct mechanism to prioritize the severity of customer outages, such that the drivers of most concerning outages can be inspected more carefully. Next slide, please. So I'll share a little bit more on modeling architecture. Again, we've discussed that in the previous workshops, but there in the audience there are many who's seeing this material for the first time. So with that in mind, I want to just talk a little more about the architecture. So the warp to resilience model is designed as a stochastic hourly model, which simulates the potential outcomes of 8760 hours of a given planning year. So we focus on 3 snapshots: the current infrastructure as is, and the corresponding resilience results. A long-term future around mid-century where California is expiring with an ambitious target of 100% clean energy. And then a midpoint that highlights the transition in place. So in the model, we take a resource portfolio as an exogenous input, meaning that the model does not aim to solve for any optimal resource build-out or retirement, just takes it as given. The key outputs, after accounting for operational limitations and availability of the resources and demand uncertainty, the key outputs include loss of load and unserved energy metrics that are measured at 2 levels, at the bulk grid level and also distribution system levels. So it's a work in progress, but once completed, we plan to make it open source. The model and the results will be available for public review and use. So now, with the new Equitable Resilience Index that will be developed under this study with the CPUC, we expect the users to get a more detailed view of community and customer vulnerability indicators against power outages. And by combining this data layer with detailed modeled outage outcomes, the users will then be able to prioritize outages most concerning to them by applying heavier weights to a subset of kind of certain types of outages, whether it's long duration outages or outages with certain nature, and outages experienced in certain areas that are more vulnerable. And the users will be able to test alternative resource solutions and compare how these solutions improve resilience based on their estimated impacts on outages of concern. Basically, the estimated impact on the resilience trapezoid that Roseanne presented earlier today. And then outside of the model, with additional input on resource costs, the users can also calculate a normalized risk spent efficiency metric as a percent reduction in outages of concern for every dollar spent. And this would help evaluate trade-offs across different plans. So I'll pass it back to Mariko briefly.
Thanks, Owner. I want to make one note and interrupt Owner for one slide. Oh, Julian, did you want to say something? Okay, so we do have a question in the Q&A that's more logistical, so I'll answer that now. And the question is, will the slides be shared? The answer is yes, we will share the slides. We do have it posted on the website, so we'll do that. And also after the presentation, we'll post another version of the slides with the polling results, so you can see that and refer back to that. But before Owner continues, to talk about our demonstration design and data sources, and especially before we get into our future information sessions, which will be more technical and very much in the weeds of data and analytics. Also, for those of you who haven't seen our presentations before, I wanted to pause here to stress that we are under no illusion that data and models alone are going to get us to a resilient, equitable, cost-effective, and affordable future that we want. Data and models are very valuable and needed, but that's not all we need. At best, they will make sure that what we already know is possible from history, from our experience, that's not a blind spot going forward. Also, to the extent we can model underlying dynamics of a system, we can potentially project new future patterns or trends, but that's not the universe of possibility. And we believe that tough decisions, they're best made by people, not by data or model output, by people using the best information and analytics they have available to them, but also by using creative and visionary thinking and through clear definition of their risks and risk tolerances. And as satisfying as it might be, we'll never aim for that model that gives you the one final output that says, do this here with this technology. So that's not what we're trying to do. What we aim for is to make this complex information digestible, make it easy to sort through and prioritize, and clarify trade-offs of alternative choices. So on this, I could talk about this a lot more if you want, but on this, I'll just leave you with this quote from Margaret Heffernan. She's an executive coach with a specialty in decision-making under uncertainty. And I highly recommend this podcast episode if you haven't heard it or already, or if you're curious about it. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Owner to describe model applications, our proposed model demonstrations, and study schedule.
Thanks, Mariko. Recognizing the cross-cutting nature of the resilience problem, our primary goal is to develop a scalable model that can support broad grid planning processes as well as more targeted project or problem-specific mitigation efforts. So a grid planning application would focus on aligning system-wide resource portfolio selection with local resilience needs. Whereas project-specific application would assume that a project location is already identified, but aims to inform how that project should be selected, sized, or configured to address key outage concerns at that location. A problem-specific application would start with an assessment of the outage implications of a specific problem or hazard, like extreme heat waves or wildfires, floods, and so on, and then identifies ideal resource attributes or locations for effective mitigation. So they're really broad, as I said, like because resilience problem is so cross-cutting. There's a wide range of applications. And what we want to do next is, if you go to the next slide, Marco, we want to just develop examples of use cases to demonstrate each of these three types of model applications throughout our study. So for the grid planning use case, we will consider a load serving entity, LSC, aiming to determine the optimal mix of the resource solutions in their portfolio, such that it best synergizes with the community and customer level investments that are already scaled largely through private investments. And in this example, we'll show how the model can help LSCs better understand the scope of the resilience problem at a higher system level. And this can serve as the basis for analyzing technical potential of the DERs to provide resilience, and accordingly for determining how they could be available to bulk grid for system services when they're not needed for resilience under blue sky conditions. And with this information, the LSCs can then refine how they model DERs and their availability and re-optimize their overall resource plans and portfolio from the perspective of ratepayers. So that's our first demonstration. Our second demonstration focuses on a project-specific use case. In this example, we will consider a customer with a specific resilience need, aiming to minimize the net cost of a project designed to address this need. So here the scope is somewhat flipped compared to the grid planning demonstration. So instead of optimizing resources to meet bulk grid needs while providing resilience, the key question here is how a project, from the customer's view, can mitigate most of the resilience risk, the outage risk for that customer, while the project also offers some system services to offset the cost on that customer. So here our model can provide information on current and also future outage risk profiles for that customer, which is needed to analyze different mitigation strategies and their trade-offs with market revenues. This allows the customer to refine project science, configuration, and also operating protocols in the use case to lower net cost of achieving resilience from their private perspective. And our third and final demonstration takes a problem-specific use case in which a local authority aims to determine where to allocate funds to mitigate outages and their impacts on their community. In this example, our model results can help better understand the scope of community hazards and vulnerabilities and quantify the trade-offs of placing different resources in different areas. Next slide, please. Okay. So just a little bit on our overall schedule and deliverables. We are aiming for this study to be completed by Q3 of 2025, so about a year from now. So this is an ambitious but achievable timeline, and we'll keep all stakeholders informed throughout the study process. Our key deliverables will include model demonstrations for the three use cases I just described, a final report, and a detailed technical white paper that goes with that report. So here, the stakeholder engagement is really crucial for our study process. So we're planning for 6 information sessions total to incorporate your feedback at key stages of the study. So today we're introducing the overall study and seeking your input on data sources, overall analytical approach, and the work plan. And in our next session, we will present initial findings on data layers compiled and gather feedback on index development. And then the sessions after that will dive deeper into model demonstrations and draft results, where we'll seek comments and feedback on model refinement and validation. And our last and sixth session will be a briefing on the final report. So with So I think that's all that I want to cover today. I think we can go through some of the Q&As, I think.
Great, thanks, Owner. Marco, I don't know if the next slide is the Q&A. No, okay. So we'll have you pause the recording for right now before we go into the Q&A.
Okay, yes, thank you. We will get to the rest of these questions in the next Q&A, and we have a longer Q&A session later. Thank you for those. So I'll talk about key data sources. We are currently in the data review and collection phase for the Equitable Resiliency Index. So we haven't made any final decisions on data to use, but we have identified a few key data sources. So firstly, I want to put these up. In our first workshop in 2023, we talked about resilience definitions, and we talked about the emergence of the term resilience in the industry and how it led down these two paths. So one was analysis, down the path of analysis of grid infrastructure resilience, and the other was focused more on community resilience. And only in recent years have we seen really major collective effort in the industry to carve a third path that merges the two, that recognizes that grid planning must recognize the diversity and potential severity of impacts to people and to communities when the grid fails. And this has been driven by a few epiphanies in the industry, including but not limited to the realization that resilience problem is here to stay and seems it will only get worse if we don't adapt with a more integrated approach, and that continuing to plan the grid somewhat irrespective of the diverse and dynamic needs and situations of customers, that will only erode affordability, equity, and justice, which is not something we want to do. So these initiatives you see are, a lot of them are more recent. There's no clear industry-wide model to follow yet, but these are important to keep an eye on for their insights and alternative perspectives. So that's what we're doing. So if you go back to your browser, I'm going to activate a third poll, and that is asking what related industry initiatives are you familiar with? And we've got a list here. Select all that apply. So we've got the CPUC's four-pillar methodology and workshop series, which Roseanne provided an overview of at the beginning of this presentation. If you've heard of the EPRI Climate Ready initiative, that's another one, check that box. FEMA has a resilience analysis and planning tool called WRAPT. If you're familiar with that, check that. We've got 2 climate adaptation vulnerability assessments that I'm aware of being completed to date. One is SCEs, and then more recently PG&Es. We also refer to those as the CAVAs. Oh, good. A lot of people are familiar with the CAVAs. And then we've got the SB 100 report that's done by the joint state agencies, and they've been looking at and considering what they call non-energy benefits. So if you're familiar with that, there's also a recent DOE Stanford-led initiative called EARNEST, and that just launched to my awareness. Oh, okay. So no one's heard of that. That's understandable. It's pretty new. Okay, so we see a lot of people in the audience are familiar with the 4-pillar methodology, which is good to know, and the SCE and PG&E CAVAs, and to some extent the SB 100 report. So that's great. So these are initiatives that we are keeping an eye on. We're trying to dovetail with to the extent we can. If you have any other suggestions for initiatives to keep an eye on, we're very open and receptive to that. So let me pause this. Thank you for your responses. In our data review and collection phase, we are looking for a few things. One is we're looking for specific indicators of vulnerabilities driving electricity outage impacts. For example, indicators that show unequal access to essential services enabled by electricity and to other resources, that would make outages more or less difficult to reduce, withstand, and recover from, thinking of the resilience trapezoid. Indicators that show a susceptibility to an emergency situation that would compound with outages. For example, if you have a heat event and you need AC or fans, you need electricity for that. These are hazards that directly impact communities and people, not just outages. We're looking for data access, completeness, and quality, and that's a big issue with these data sets. Oftentimes they're conceptually amazing, but then we look at it and the data are so limited, it's hard to see how we could use it. We're looking for other approaches for integrating user preferences and selections, just recognizing that a local planner will have a very different risk tolerance profile than their neighbor or someone, another planner somewhere else in the state. We're looking for methodologies for weighting individual indicators into a composite resilience index. And then we're looking for examples of effective GIS, geospatial tools for decision support. So I'm going to open up one more poll. And this is a question for you. Which related data sources are you most familiar with? You can select up to 4. This is not an exhaustive list, but these are a few of the key data sources that we've identified so far. So select up to 4 you're most familiar with, and I'll just talk through them as you're deciding. We've got Sandia's Resilience Node Cluster Analysis tool, which if you've been to the other CPUC Microgrids and Resilience meetings, you've heard about that. We've got the utilities Kava's, FEMA's WRAPT tool, which I mentioned before. CPUC has an affordability ratio calculator. We've got LBNL's interruption cost estimator, or ICE, which is now, I think, in version 2.0. We've got CalEPA, OEHHA's CalEnviroscreen, which is now in version 4.0. The Healthy Places Index, which was developed by the Public Health Alliance of Southern California. And then we've got a CEJ screening tool by the Federal Climate and Economic Justice team, EPA's EJ screen, and the CDC ATSTR Social Vulnerability Index. So select the top 4 that you're the most familiar with. Yeah, that makes sense. A lot of people are familiar with the CalEnviroscreen. We use that a lot. It's a great tool, a great map. Also, one that I was more familiar with was the Healthy Places Index, but it looks like we've only got one in the audience that's familiar with that. That's also a really great online tool. It's for a different industry, but it's very good. And some familiarity with RenCat and the Kava and EJ screen. Okay. So now I'm going to show you the same list, but ask you to upvote or downvote based on, for the data sources you're familiar with, upvote or downvote based on what you think is the relevance to the study that we're describing today. So let me open that up for you. So you'll see a list that I've pre-populated there. If you could just focus on the list first and upvoting and downvoting what you think is most relevant or not to the study, that would be good. Once you're done, once you've looked through the list, you can go back up and you can enter new data sources. If there's one on your mind that you think is missing from this list, please put it in and we'll make sure to look at it and review it before our next information session and consider that as a data source. So I'll give you a few minutes to go through this. It's really just the same list as before. We've got Sandia's RenCat model up here at the top, and the Kava's up here at the top too. CalEnviroscreen. Let's see, I'm just curious what we've downvoted. Oh, nothing's downvoted. Okay, so nothing's downvoted yet, but we've got a lot of upvotes, especially these ones that you see here on the screen. CalEnviro screen and EJ screen, and Sandia's Red Cat. So that's really good to know. It's good to know what your impressions and priorities are right now. What we'll do is we'll look at this and discuss, and we'll talk about them in more depth, these data sources in more depth in the next information session. And we'll also at that point hopefully have started the curation process, and we can explain why we selected certain data sources for certain things in our study and why. So thank you for responding to this. I'm going to pause this one. Okay, so here's the list again. I'll just talk through it. We've got a little overview of what each tool or data source is, what the key use is. So RenCat, our understanding is that is used to guide outage mitigation resource planning across and within communities. That's been demonstrated through the workshops that I mentioned earlier. If you haven't seen that, take a look at those presentations. They're really good, very informative. The utilities CAVAs, our understanding is that resilience metrics are used to prioritize grid investments. So SCE developed two metrics. One's the community resiliency metric, and the other one's the community impact metric. And PG&E used the federal BRIC index also to prioritize grid investments and get a better understanding of the community needs. FEMA's RAP tool is designed for emergency planning and preparedness. We've got the CPUC affordability ratio calculator, which is used to develop strategies to mitigate future energy rate increases. LB&L's ICE, that's generally used for high-level benefits to reliability improvements. So not down at the community level, but more like a high-level program level. We also understand that loss of load values are used for wholesale market design. CalEnviro screen, that's key use is to direct climate investments, and for those of you who are familiar with it, you're familiar with the disadvantaged communities designation. And then we've got the Healthy Places Index, which is used in the health industry to direct health funding and efforts. The federal CEJ screening tool is used to guide programs targeting disadvantaged communities again. So that's their main output, is a designation for disadvantaged communities. And then we've got the EJ screen geared towards environmental protection policies and programs, and the CDC's Social Vulnerability Index used to prepare for and recover from public health emergencies. So you can see there's really a range of use cases here. They're not all directly applicable to grid planning. We've also got this in an Excel spreadsheet. It's posted along with the meeting materials. And we wanted to introduce these to you as some of the key data sources we're reviewing and help get you more familiar with some of these that you might not be familiar with. So we've got a few different references for you. They're all in the same Excel spreadsheet. There are 4 tabs. So we've got a list of industry initiatives, which we've gone through, data sources, which we've just gone through. We've got a few selected references, which I'll talk about on the next slide, these publications. And then Shane is going to take us through some decision support tool examples. And we have a request for all of you in the audience, if you'd like to continue being engaged with the study and guiding our analytics and methodology. We're requesting that you review these references and come prepared with some opinions and suggestions for the next information session. We're not asking you to look at every detail of them, but just enough to orient yourself on the purpose and the key takeaways of each. So we're talking executive level summary, if you can read through that, or landing page read as your time allows. We know you're all very busy too, but that would be really helpful for our next info session if you could get familiar with these. Okay, so these are the list of publications that we're suggesting, of course. The energy storage study, scaling up and crossing bounds. Again, executive summary level. There's a great paper by Anna Brockway and others called Inequitable Access to Distributed Energy Resources. CPUC staff paper, the original concept paper that laid a lot of the groundwork for the work that we're doing now. There's a paper by Jesse Dugan that's really good, talks about social vulnerability to long duration power outages. And then a paper by Chelsea Sparty and others at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. They prepared this for the CPUC, where they looked at a large set of local hazard mitigation plans and started to develop a schema for extracting information out of that, and information that we could use for a study like this. So please take a look if you have time. And with that, I'm going to turn that over to Shane for the next part of the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Mariko. You can go to the next slide, please. All right.
Oh,
so
actually, I'm sorry, Shane. Did we, I should have turned it to Julian. Did we want to do any Q&A, or should we go with Shane and do the larger Q&A after?
Look,
Sorry.
perhaps let's continue the conversation, and we can pick up the Q&A later. Just there's a few kind of more meaty questions that might take a while, and just so
Okay.
we're on track with time.
Sounds good. Sorry about that, Shane.
problem.
Passing it over to Shane.
no problem. Great. Thank you. So our role in this is really to help inform and develop a decision support tool for this project. And so obviously the objective here is to support the needs of your needs really for resiliency planning as it relates to future grid planning. And so the way that we're thinking of a decision support tool for this is to be one that would be helpful in characterizing customer outages, use profiles, looking at historic and projected outage characteristics, customer use characteristics. And then what we've been focused on as we get into this project is really digging into the community resilience side of the equation and looking at social vulnerability, some of the economic measures, as well as the community's preparedness level. And then also porting in information as it relates to natural hazard exposure and how those things might not only affect the community, but also the ability of the grid to supply power. Next slide. So I'm going to click through some examples here just to, again, familiarize you with some of these tools that are out there. Rico listed off several of them, and I think all of those are really good examples. I'm just going to click through some of the ones that are out there that others have developed, and then I'm going to provide a bit more time on some of the tools that we've developed here at Spatial Informatics Group. So this is an example of the FEMA National Risk Index. It's basically porting in a bunch of information on 18 different hazard risk factors at the U.S. county and tract scale. And then Rico kind of clicked through some of the other tools that are out there that we've explored. And this is just a short example list of those decision support tools that are currently available. Next slide, please. So this is an example of Pyrocast, which is a near-term fire forecasting tool that we developed under a CEC grant. We're calling that particular project Pyrogens. We're actually getting close to closing up on that project. But one of the things in the lower left that we did to inform this near-term fire forecasting tool was developing basically a modeling framework or decision tool framework that help guide basically the sources of information, the different model inputs. With Pyrocast itself, it has these two wildfire behavior engines that basically generate near real-time forecast of fire spread as well as risk to and from the electricity grid. And then this is just a way for us to kind of think through how we're going to organize all the information, hopefully, that you can provide, and through our research, we can start to plug into this particular tool. For this tool, we basically it's turned out to be a really valuable tool. But here I just wanted to give you a sense of some of the different features and functions that are included in there, which include some contextual information in terms of transmission lines, what kind of structures that might be impacted, other information that's piped in from VIIRS and MODIS satellites. And we also ported in wildlife alert cameras. And so one of the things here has been really helpful is just understanding kind of where that fire is going to go within a 14-day horizon, And it also has other information that's really valuable to those people that are risk managers at utilities or otherwise with the federal or state government, including information on weather forecast and some of the fuels information and other pieces of information. Next slide, please. Another example is a Planscape, which is really a tool to help improve decision-making as it relates to where to treat forest fuels and vegetation and that kind of thing. So there's kind of two components. There's actually, we're continuing to build this right now. It's just right now it's kind of working towards phase 2 of the project. But one of the elements of it is this Explore tool where you can pop up information for, I think we have around 100 different geospatial layers that underlie this tool. And you can post up and view different thematic map layers. One may be related to poverty levels, or in this particular instance, it's looking at information as it relates to structure vulnerability and fuel loads, things like that. But another feature of it is you can pull in an area of interest. So this could be a service territory, or if you're looking at a more granular level, you can delineate your own area of interest. And from that, we run it through an optimization tool using an underlying set of variables to basically identify those areas that would be priorities for treatment. And so in this particular example, it's just showing kind of the results of an area that I delineated around South Lake Tahoe, California. And then from there, on the left-hand side, there's some graphics that kind of indicate some of the other information that might be important for a planner in terms of its potential impact on spotted owls, or fuel loads, or structure exposure, and that kind of thing. So this is just something that helps to aid those forest planners or vegetation managers where more specifically in what priority they might implement some kind of fuels reduction type treatments. Next slide, please. And here's another example where through the NASA Severe program in Southeast Asia, we developed a tool that takes advantage of all the satellite information that NASA is producing and is able and has methodologies in the back end that help planners basically understand how land use and forest cover and things like that have changed over time. And here again, just trying to point out some of the different features of what a decision support tool could be as it relates to this project. So there'd be a map interface, we can generate graphics as it relates to that particular thing. And then, yeah, I think that's all I really had to say on that. Just again, just trying to illustrate some of the different examples of some of the elements that we might include in a decision support system from this particular project. Next slide, please. Another thing we're really interested in your input on is some of the functions and features. And one of the, I guess, the decision support tools that we've evaluated is wildfirerisk.org, which has an element in there that looks at vulnerable populations as it relates to wildfire risk. And here we just took some liberties to basically, if we were to have an underlying base map related to outage, we could basically overlay an area of interest with some of the other information as it relates to the vulnerable populations or socioeconomic considerations that a grid planner might be looking to basically explore. And so some of the things that we are looking to consider are obviously maps and some of the overlays. I think those are very important. Generating some graphical outputs like in the lower right. Here's an example where they looked at different communities. This is a particular paradise, for example, in terms of where does it exist in terms of fire risk. We modified it to represent outage likelihood to make it more relevant to this audience. But again, just trying to think through some of the different parts and pieces of information that might be relevant to you. You know, all these other things that we're looking at is some tabular summaries that we can calculate for an area of interest, and then potentially package the information into a user-ready report to help summarize all the information for that area of interest. There's some other things in terms of like having a user-defined selectable resilience metric. So as we go through our evaluation of the data that is available, that would be something that to consider where the user would really be only interested in certain metrics relevant to that particular community. And so that would be something that we're considering as we move forward. Obviously, building in quite a bit of interactivity so you can explore all the different parts and pieces and information that's underlying the tool itself. Next slide. And so with that super high level run through of some decision support tools, we are, I guess, asking if you can maybe do some homework for us, and that is to kind of review the decision support tools from our list provided and identify those tools that you like. It looks like we have some preliminary thumbs up on certain decision support tools that you've explored already. So that's a really good start for us. And then again, I think as you are looking through those tools, is what are those features and functions that are most appealing to you? And then probably the most important is really us dialing in on that information. What are the outputs that are critical for you to provide or to support your grid resiliency planning needs? So I guess with that, I'll hand it back off to Mariko or Julian.
Great, so we'll go ahead and move into another Q&A session. Marco, if you could pause the recording, please.
So if you have any, this is the website for the, go to that website and look at the events and materials on the bottom, I think it's on the bottom right. You'll see this workshop, the materials that were presented, and you'll also see, if you scroll all the way down, you'll see the workshops, links to the workshops and materials of workshops that we've held in the past that were referred to in this presentation. And feel free to reach out to either Julian or I. These are our information emails, and we can pass your questions on along to Lumen and SIG. Thank you so much, and we appreciate your attendance.